The old K9 lay on a cold steel table. One paper would end his pain. The other would make someone responsible for every night he had left. The town was ready to forget him. But a retired Navy SEAL saw the dog tag on his collar and froze. Years ago, this same German Shepherd had saved a man from dying in the snow. Now no one had room for him. Then the SEAL's own dog stepped into the room, shaking with fear, and placed her muzzle beside him. That was the moment everything changed. Maybe God sometimes sends the smallest soul to remind us what mercy still means. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. The snow had come lightly that morning, not as a storm, but as a thin white breath over Sawtooth Valley. It rested on the roof of Wyatt Callahan's cabin, on the dark arms of the pines, and across the open field behind the house where an old training kennel leaned against the winter. Sunlight slipped through the clouds in pale strips, bright enough to make the snow shine, but not warm enough to soften the ground. Wyatt stood on a ladder beside the kennel roof, driving a nail into a warped board. The hammer rose and fell with the same controlled rhythm he used for everything. No wasted movement, no muttering under his breath, no radio playing from the porch. Just the sound of metal against wood, the creak of old beams, and the occasional soft crunch of Vesper shifting in the snow below. The German Shepherd lay near the open shed door, her black and brown coat thick against the cold. Her muzzle had begun to silver, and one ear carried a small scar along the edge, but nothing about her looked weak. Even at 8 years old, Vesper watched the world like it owed her an explanation before it came any closer. Wyatt glanced down at her. "You hear something?" Vesper did not move. That meant no. He went back to the roof. The kennel had been built years ago, before he had decided silence was easier than people. Back then, the place had held purpose. Rescue dogs had trained here, handlers had laughed in the yard, commands had cut through the morning air, paws had hammered across the packed dirt like small drums. Now the doors hung slightly crooked, rust marked the old chains, a few metal bowls still sat upside down in the corner, half buried in dust and frozen leaves. Wyatt had told himself he was repairing it because winter was hard on wood. That was true. It was not the whole truth. He struck another nail into place, and something small shifted inside the pocket of his dark brown field jacket. He reached in and touched the old K9 tag without looking at it. The habit came without permission. And a brief pressure of thumb against scratched metal, then his hand returned to the hammer. Some things stayed with a man because he chose them. Some things stayed because they had nowhere else to go. Vesper lifted her head. This time, Wyatt noticed, her ears came forward, her body tightened. Not alarm yet, not threat, something in between. Then he heard it, a distant slide, tires losing their grip on frozen road, followed by the dull crunch of a vehicle dropping into packed snow. Wyatt was off the ladder before the echo faded. Vesper was already moving. She crossed the yard toward the fence, low and fast, not barking. Wyatt grabbed his gloves from the rail, shrugged deeper into his coat, and followed. His boots broke through the thin crust of snow, each step steady, measured. At the bend near the old service road, a small pickup sat angled into the ditch. One front wheel had sunk deep into the snowbank. Steam rose faintly from under the hood. The driver's door pushed open with effort. A woman stepped out. She was not dressed for wandering. That was the first thing Wyatt noticed. No city coat, no helpless shoes, no suitcase held like a plea. She wore a weatherproof parka in a muted green-gray dark outdoor pants tucked into snow boots and a canvas medical bag slung across one shoulder. And her hair, brown and wind-tangled, had been tied low at the back of her neck. She looked tired, but not panicked. Vesper stopped 10 feet ahead of Wyatt and gave a low growl. The woman froze immediately, not in fear, in respect. "I'm not coming closer," she said, raising one hand slowly. Wyatt stopped beside Vesper. His eyes moved from the woman to the truck, then to the road behind her. "You hurt?" "No." She looked toward the buried wheel. "Just stuck." "You alone?" "Yes." Her answer came cleanly. No performance, no trembling added for effect. Wyatt studied her for another moment. "Road's bad through the pass." "I know. I was trying to reach Northridge before it got worse." She adjusted the strap of the medical bag. "Northridge K9 Rest Center." At the word K9, Vesper's growl faded. Not gone. Changed. The woman noticed it. Her gaze dropped to Vesper, careful and soft, but not sentimental. "She's military, isn't she?" Wyatt did not answer. The woman nodded once, as if the silence told her enough. "I'm Elena Ward, veterinary nurse. I do mobile care for retired working dogs." Wyatt looked into the cab of the pickup. Plastic bins sat on the passenger seat. Bandage rolls, thermal blankets, medication cases, a folded lifting harness, and several packets of specialized food. On top of one folder, he saw the stamped words, Northridge K9 Rest Center. "What do you need?" he asked. "A tow, if the signal works, and directions to the center by the safest route." Elena glanced toward the road. I have dogs waiting on medication." Wyatt heard the practical edge in her voice. Not drama, not begging. A woman counting time, weather, and pain. He pulled out his phone. No signal. "Cabin has a landline," he said. "Maybe it still works." "Thank you." She reached back into the truck for her bag. Vesper stepped forward. The movement was small, but enough. Elena stopped again. Wyatt looked down. Vesper's nose had lifted toward Elena's sleeve. The dog's body had gone rigid, her eyes fixed not on the woman's hands, but on the cuff of her parka. Elena looked at the sleeve, then back at Vesper. "Oh," she said quietly. She didn't move closer. And instead, she slowly opened one pocket and pulled out a folded cloth, stained faintly with antiseptic and dark fur. "I was with a shepherd this morning," she said. "German Shepherd, older male. His name is Atlas." Vesper did not bark, but her ears shifted. Wyatt felt it before he understood it, the way a room changes when someone says the name of the dead. Elena folded the cloth back into her pocket. "He was search and rescue, retired, arthritis, nerve weakness in the hind legs, chronic pain. Northridge is losing funding, and he needs special care no one is committed to yet." Wyatt's face did not change, but inside him, something old turned its head. Elena continued, not pushing, just stating what was true. "If they can't find a humane care plan, Dr. Vale may have to recommend euthanasia, not because he's unwanted, because he's hurting, and there may be no place equipped to help him." The wind moved through the fence wire. Wyatt heard other voices under hers. No longer fit for service, no viable option. "We did everything we could," phrases people used when they wanted grief to sound organized. He looked away first. "Come on," he said. "You can use the phone." Elena did not thank him too much. Wyatt appreciated that. He led her back across the yard, keeping a few steps of distance between them. Vesper walked beside him, but her attention stayed on Elena's medical bag. At the cabin, Wyatt did not take Elena inside the house. He opened the heated shed attached to the kennel and cleared a chair with one hand. "You can wait here," he said. "Phone's in the mudroom. I'll call the tow company." Elena looked at the old kennel walls, the repaired roof, the rusted bowls stacked by the door. "You trained dogs here?" "Long time ago." She seemed to understand the boundary in his voice and did not cross it. Wyatt checked her ID before making the call. He did it without apology. Elena handed it over without offense. That, too, he noticed. The tow company said the mountain road was closed until morning. Elena absorbed the news with a quiet breath. "Then I'll sleep in the truck." "No," Wyatt said. The word came out before he had fully decided it. He looked toward the white road, then at the low clouds gathering behind the ridge. "The shed has heat. You stay there. Door locks from the inside." Elena held his gaze. "I don't want to trouble you." "You're not." It was not kindness exactly. Not yet. It was a decision made because leaving someone outside in that cold would be a different kind of failure. By evening, the snow thickened again. Wyatt brought a blanket, bottled water, and a flashlight to the shed door. Elena thanked him once. Vesper stood behind him the whole time, quiet and watchful. Later, inside the cabin, Wyatt sat at the kitchen table with the lights off. The house was still, too still. He expected Vesper to come in, circle twice beside the stove, and lie near his boots. She did not. Wyatt stood and looked through the window. Vesper lay outside the shed door, her body curled against the snow, her eyes open and facing the dark road beyond the fence, the road that led toward Northridge. Wyatt rested one hand against the window frame. He knew that dog. Vesper did not guard strangers unless something in them had already crossed a line deeper than trust. And when she refused to leave a place, it meant one thing: something out there was not finished. The storm had passed during the night. By morning, Sawtooth Valley looked almost untouched by hardship. Sunlight spread across the snowfields in long white sheets, turning the frozen roads and pine branches into something clean and painfully bright. The mountains beyond the valley stood sharp against the pale blue sky. From the porch, Wyatt could see smoke lifting from only a few chimneys in town. The road was still blocked. He checked the radio report twice anyway. No plows through the upper pass until late afternoon. Elena listened quietly from the shed doorway while tightening the straps on her medical bag. And she had slept only a few hours, but she moved with the calm efficiency of someone used to working tired. "I'll walk from here," she said. Wyatt leaned one shoulder against the porch post. "That's 8 miles through packed snow. The dogs still need medication." She said it simply. Not dramatically, just a fact. Vesper stood beside Wyatt, ears forward. The dog had barely left the shed door all night. Wyatt looked down at her. "You're staying here." Vesper immediately walked toward the gate. Elena noticed first. She doesn't seem interested in staying. Wyatt exhaled slowly through his nose. He hated when the dog did that, not because she disobeyed him, because she was usually right. Yet an hour later, the three of them moved through the valley road beneath tall pines heavy with snow. Wyatt walked ahead carrying a shovel across one shoulder and a thermos clipped to his pack. Elena followed carefully behind him, boots sinking into the softer edges of the trail. Vesper moved freely between them, sometimes vanishing ahead between the trees before reappearing again without a sound. The cold bit differently out there, not sharp, heavy, the kind that settled into your joints and stayed. "You built that kennel yourself?" Elena asked after a long stretch of silence. Wyatt nodded once. "Years ago." "For rescue dogs?" "Some." "You stopped?" He adjusted the strap of his pack. Life changed." Elena did not press further. Wyatt appreciated that more than politeness. By midday, Northridge appeared beyond the trees. The center sat against a low hill overlooking the valley, surrounded by old fencing half buried in snow. A faded American flag moved weakly in the wind above the main building. From a distance, the place still looked respectable. Quiet cabins, open training yard, neat rows of kennels. Closer, the cracks showed. One floodlight hung broken above the yard gate. Part of the fencing leaned inward. Ice crawled along the inside corners of the windows. And even before stepping inside, Wyatt caught the smell. Damp wood, disinfectant, old fur, heating systems pushed past their limits. A woman in her 60s opened the front door before Elena could knock. "You made it." Her voice carried relief, but exhaustion sat underneath it like weight. Maribel was smaller than Wyatt expected, with silver-gray hair cut short near the jaw and rough hands reddened by winter work. She wore layered sweaters beneath a faded work coat, and a ring of keys hung from her belt, clinking softly when she moved. Then her eyes dropped to Vesper. "Well," Mara murmured, "you brought company." Inside, the warmth came unevenly. The one side of the hallway felt overheated while the other carried a draft sharp enough to sting the skin. Metal bowls lined shelves beside stacked paperwork and medication trays. Somewhere deeper in the building, an old shepherd barked once and fell silent again. Elena immediately moved into work mode, checking medication boxes and asking about heater failures. Wyatt stayed near the entrance. He had been in places like this before, not dog centers, facilities that kept running because a few tired people refused to let them die. Mara handed Elena several folders. "We lost heat in Kennel C again last night. And I moved the older dogs closer to the main hall." "Any seizures?" "One." Mara rubbed her forehead. "Baxter," he stabilized. As they talked, Vesper slowly walked the hallway, not sniffing for threats, listening. Wyatt followed her past the kennels. Some dogs barked when they saw him. Others only lifted their heads. One old black Labrador slept through everything. A shepherd missing one eye watched him from the back corner of its run without moving. Another dog flinched violently when someone dropped a metal scoop somewhere nearby. Wyatt's jaw tightened. None of these animals looked dangerous, just worn down, like old tools that had once mattered very much to somebody. A door opened behind him. "Mr. Callahan?" Wyatt turned. Sheriff Cole Ransom stepped inside, carrying a clipboard beneath one arm. He was broad through the shoulders, older, his face weathered by cold seasons and responsibility. Snow clung to the brim of his dark sheriff's hat. I heard Mara had visitors. His gaze shifted briefly to Elena, then Vesper, finally to Wyatt. This place is under final review, he said carefully. Didn't expect tourists. Wyatt gave a dry look. I don't vacation in dog shelters. For the first time, something close to amusement touched the sheriff's face. It disappeared quickly. We're doing inventory next week, Ransom continued. Oh, transfer evaluations start after that. Transfer to where? Elena asked sharply from down the hall. The sheriff hesitated. Facilities that still have funding. Mara looked away. That answer told Wyatt enough. Some dogs would move, some wouldn't. He continued down the hallway behind Vesper until they reached the final kennel near the back corner. Vesper stopped walking. Inside the run, an old German Shepherd lay on a folded blanket near the wall heater. Atlas. Age had hollowed him in certain places. His hind legs rested awkwardly beneath him, and silver spread heavily across his muzzle and brow. But his eyes remained alert, tired, not empty. And near his paws sat an old leather training glove. Atlas lifted his head slowly when Vesper approached. Neither dog barked. Vesper lowered herself onto the concrete outside the kennel gate, pressing one side of her face near the bars. After a moment, Atlas dragged himself closer and rested his muzzle opposite hers. The hallway seemed quieter after that. Wyatt crouched beside the kennel. Atlas smelled faintly of antiseptic, old fur, and winter air. Not death, just exhaustion. He doesn't eat alone anymore, Elena said softly behind him. Someone has to sit with him. Wyatt glanced back. She handed him a thin medical folder. Inside were therapy notes, medication schedules, x-rays, intake records, and an old photograph. The picture showed a younger Atlas standing in chest-deep snow beside a rescue team. Next to him sat a man wrapped in emergency blankets, face pale from exposure but alive. Cal Whitcomb, owner of the hardware store in town. Wyatt stared at the photograph longer than he meant to. He knew Cal. Everyone did. A dog had once dragged that man out of a blizzard, and now the same dog lay forgotten in the last kennel of a dying facility. Something about that settled badly inside his chest. Not anger. Worse. Recognition. Atlas slowly nudged the old leather glove with one paw. And Wyatt noticed the initials burned faintly into the leather. T.R. Thomas Reeve. For a second, the hallway disappeared. Snow, rotor noise, blood freezing dark against white ground. A voice laughing somewhere behind him years ago. If I go first, make sure somebody still calls my dog a good boy. Wyatt stood too quickly. The folder closed sharply in his hand. Elena watched him carefully but said nothing. That silence saved him from walking out immediately. From deeper inside the building came the sound of coughing engines and rattling pipes. Mara cursed under her breath. The heater had failed again. Atlas did not react. Vesper did. And she rose to her feet and stayed beside the kennel door instead of following Wyatt back down the hall. That unsettled him more than anything else. Because Vesper always followed him. Always. Wyatt looked at the dog. Come on. Vesper did not move. The old shepherd inside the kennel lifted his tired eyes toward Wyatt once more. And for the first time since entering North Ridge, Wyatt had the uncomfortable feeling that he was no longer just visiting a place. Something here had already begun waiting for him. The final inventory day arrived under a sky too bright for what waited inside North Ridge. Sunlight poured over the snow-covered yard until every fence rail and roof edge shone clean and white. Trucks lined the service road beyond the gate. A few town employees stood near the main office with clipboards tucked beneath their arms. Two men in expensive winter jackets from the resort company spoke quietly beside a black SUV. Their boots were too new for the place. No one had come to watch a life end. That was what made it worse. They had come for signatures, measurements, transfer forms, and property notes. They had come because North Ridge was becoming paperwork. And Wyatt stood near the kennel entrance with Vesper at his side. The old German Shepherd's body was rigid, her black and brown coat bristling along the shoulders. She had not settled since morning. Across the yard, Cal Whitcomb stood beside his hardware store truck, hands buried deep in the pockets of his yellow-brown coat. He looked uncomfortable, but not enough to leave. Not yet. Eli Boone leaned near the fence line, silent beneath his battered work hat, watching everything with the stillness of a man who had learned not to trust official mornings. Sheriff Cole Ransom stepped out of the main building with a folder under one arm. "Wyatt," he said. Mara asked if you'd come inside." Wyatt looked past him toward the small veterinary room at the end of the hall. He already knew. The room smelled of antiseptic, metal, old towels, and hard decisions. Atlas lay on the steel table. Someone had placed a folded blanket beneath him, but it did little to soften the sight. The old shepherd's hind legs rested awkwardly, and a faint tremor moved through his body each time he exhaled. His tag touched the metal surface with the smallest sound whenever he shifted. Click, pause, click. The old leather glove had been placed in a clear plastic belongings bag on the counter. Wyatt saw the burned initials through the plastic, TR, and he forced his eyes away. Dr. Hannah Vale stood beside the table, one hand resting lightly near Atlas's shoulder, but not restraining him. She had tired eyes and the steady posture of someone who had learned that mercy was not always gentle to explain. Her navy clinic jacket was zipped high against the cold seeping through the room's poor insulation. Elena stood near the cabinets, arms folded tight, face controlled but pale. Mara Bell was by the counter with her keyring clutched in one hand. The keys did not jingle today. Her grip was too tight. Ransom closed the door behind Wyatt, leaving the hallway noise outside. On the table beside Atlas were two papers. "Doctor." Hannah did not let the silence stretch too long. "Atlas's pain is not uncontrolled today," she said. "But without continuous care, it will be. He needs medication on schedule, assisted movement, pressure sore monitoring, warm bedding, and someone present at night if his breathing changes." Wyatt listened without moving. Hannah continued. "If there is no care plan, euthanasia is the humane recommendation, not because he's old, not because he's inconvenient, because unmanaged pain is not kindness." The words were firm. That mattered. Wyatt respected her for not hiding behind sentiment. Mara swallowed once and slid one of the papers closer. "This is the transfer agreement," she said. "Northridge signs him over for special care. Whoever takes him assumes the cost, the risk, and the decisions after today." Ransom touched the other page with 2 fingers. "And this is the consent form, if no transfer happens." The room seemed smaller after that. Vesper stood at the door, refusing to enter. Her ears were back, her chest moving too fast. Wyatt knew that look. The metal table, the smell, the instruments. She remembered things her body had never found words for. Atlas turned his head slightly at the sound of her breathing. Not toward Wyatt, toward Vesper. The old dog's eyes opened a little wider. For a moment, no person in that room mattered. Only the 2 dogs did. Vesper took one step in. Her nails clicked against the tile. She stopped, trembling. Wyatt almost told her to stay back. Then he saw Atlas try to lift his head. It took everything the old shepherd had. His neck shook with the effort, but he kept looking at her. Vesper crossed the room, slowly, past Wyatt, past Elena, past Dr. Hannah's quiet hand. She reached the steel table and placed her muzzle on the edge beside Atlas's front paw. Atlas moved his paw just enough to touch her. Elena turned her face away. No one spoke. Wyatt stared at the 2 papers. One ended pain, one accepted it. Neither felt clean. That was the truth no one wanted to say. He picked up the pen. Ransom watched him closely. "Wyatt, before you sign anything, understand this isn't a symbolic act. You take him, you take all of it." Wyatt looked at Atlas's thin body beneath the blanket, then at Vesper, still shaking but refusing to move away. He heard Thomas Reeves' voice with painful clarity, not as memory alone, but as if the years had folded back for one sentence. "When a dog stands between you and death, don't let him leave this world like expired equipment." Wyatt lowered the pen to the paper. Mara closed her eyes. Elena held her breath. The pen moved, not across the consent form, across the transfer agreement. Wyatt signed his name slowly, every letter deliberate. For a second, even the heater seemed to stop. Ransom looked down at the paper. "You understand what you just took on?" Wyatt capped the pen and set it beside the form. "I'll take his watch." The sheriff's expression changed, just slightly. Hannah looked at Wyatt for a long moment, then reached for the syringe tray. She removed one syringe and replaced it with another from her kit. "Pain relief," she said quietly. No one corrected her. No one needed to. Wyatt stepped to the table and took off his dark brown field jacket. The cold hit his arms immediately through the faded blue-gray long-sleeve shirt beneath, but he barely noticed. He wrapped the jacket around Atlas with care, tucking it beneath the old dog's chest. Atlas was heavier than he looked, or maybe he was not heavy at all. Maybe what Wyatt felt in his arms was every night Atlas had worked, every mile through snow, every command obeyed, every person found, every year forgotten. He lifted him from the table. Atlas's head dropped against Wyatt's shoulder. Vesper stayed close to his leg. When Elena opened the door, the hallway light came in first. And then the noise from outside returned. Boots, voices, a clipboard snapping shut, a truck door closing. Wyatt carried Atlas through the building. No speech, no music, just his boots on the worn floor and Vesper's nails beside him. Outside, the winter sunlight hit them full and bright. The yard fell silent. The resort men stopped talking. The town employees looked up from their forms. Mara stood in the doorway behind Wyatt, one hand pressed against her mouth. Dr. Hannah remained just inside, holding the unused consent form at her side. Cal Whitcomb took one step forward. At first, he only stared. Then his eyes found the old tag at Atlas's collar. His face changed. Yet the years caught up with him all at once. "That dog," Cal said, barely above a whisper. No one answered. Cal's hand went to the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and opened it with clumsy fingers. From behind his license, he drew a faded photograph. Wyatt saw it from several feet away. Atlas, young and strong, chest deep in snow. Cal wrapped in emergency blankets beside him. The man's mouth trembled. "I carried this for years," Cal said, "and I still forgot." Eli Boone removed his hat. The gesture was small. Then another man near the fence did the same. Ransom stood very still. Wyatt adjusted Atlas in his arms and looked across the yard. And he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "He's not out of value," Wyatt said. "We just forgot how to be grateful." No one clapped. That would have ruined it. The words settled into the snow, into the buildings, into the people who had come for signatures and found themselves standing before a debt. Wyatt turned toward his truck. Vesper jumped into the bed first, then waited. Wyatt laid Atlas carefully onto the thick blanket Elena had spread there. Vesper lowered herself beside him, pressing her body along his back. Elena climbed in after them to check the old dog's breathing. Mara stood by the open gate as Wyatt walked around to the driver's side. And before he got in, Ransom approached. "For the record," the sheriff said, voice low, "this doesn't stop the inventory." Wyatt looked at him. "I know." "And it doesn't save Northridge." Wyatt's hand rested on the truck door. "No," he said, "but it tells you what you're really closing." Ransom had no answer. Wyatt started the truck. As he drove out past the gate, the yard remained silent behind him. In the rearview mirror, he saw Cal still holding the photograph, Eli standing with his hat in his hands, and Sheriff Ransom looking not at the property anymore, but at the old dog in the back of the truck. For the first time, Northridge did not look like land waiting to be sold. It looked like a promise waiting to see who still remembered it. The first week nearly broke the illusion. Not the town's illusion. Wyatt's. People liked moments. They liked watching a man carry an old dog out into the sunlight. They liked silence heavy with meaning. They liked stories that fit inside a single memory. What they rarely saw was what came afterward, the smell of antiseptic at 3 a.m, the sound of an old shepherd struggling to stand, medication schedules taped crookedly to a kennel wall, a man too tired to remember whether he had already given the second dose. Atlas lay on a thick orthopedic pad beneath the heater in the restored East Kennel. The old German Shepherd no longer shook constantly, but the pain still lived inside him like weather buried in the bones. Some mornings he managed half a bowl of softened food. Other mornings he turned his head away after one bite. There was no miracle. Dr. Hannah made certain nobody expected one. She arrived every third day in her dark green truck, carrying medical bags and the same direct honesty she had shown in the veterinary room. No unnecessary suffering, she reminded them during each visit. The rule applied to everyone, to Atlas, to Wyatt, to hope itself. One afternoon she adjusted Atlas's medication while Wyatt held the lifting harness steady beneath the dog's hips. If his pain stops being manageable," Hannah said quietly, "loving him also means recognizing it." Wyatt's grip tightened slightly on the straps. "You think I'm keeping him alive for myself?" "I think grief makes people bargain," Hannah answered, "especially people used to saving things." The words stayed with him long after she left. Outside, snow fell in slow, silver lines across the valley. Eli Boone hammered new boards into the eastern fence while muttering insults at frozen nails beneath his breath. The retired carpenter never announced when he arrived anymore. He simply appeared each morning with coffee and a steel thermos and another repair already in mind. That support beam's rotten. This latch won't survive another storm. Your wiring's a fire hazard. Complaints had become his way of staying. Elena worked differently. Where Eli repaired structures, Elena repaired rhythm. She organized feeding schedules, rearranged medication shelves, marked physical therapy exercises onto laminated cards. She trained volunteers how to rotate large dogs without damaging joints. Slowly, she told a nervous local veteran trying to rewrap a shepherd's back leg. If you rush because you're afraid of hurting them, you usually hurt them more. The man nodded, embarrassed. Elena softened slightly. You're doing fine. The volunteers came quietly at first. A former firefighter named Russ cleared snow before dawn without asking for credit. 2 retired veterans from the neighboring valley repaired drainage trenches near the kennel yard. One woman from town brought old blankets every Friday and left before anyone could thank her. Nobody called it therapy. Nobody called it healing. But men who had spent years avoiding phone calls suddenly showed up every morning with tools in their trucks. That was how change happened in places like Sawtooth Valley, not loudly. Slowly enough that people could pretend it was accidental. One evening, nearly a month into the 60-day delay, Wyatt found Cal Whitcomb sitting alone beside the kennel fence after sunset. The old hardware store owner held a paper cup of coffee between both hands. Snow reflected pale blue light across his lined face. Atlas slept nearby beneath 2 blankets while Vesper kept watch from the doorway. Cal stared at them for a while before speaking. I carried that photo in my wallet for 12 years. Wyatt leaned against the fence post. The one from the rescue? Cal nodded. Every winter I'd see it and think I should visit North Ridge. His mouth tightened slightly. Then spring came, and then work. Then inventory, then bills. The wind moved softly through the pine trees. I didn't forget him all at once, Cal said. That's the part people don't understand. He looked toward Atlas. You forget slowly, one season at a time. Wyatt said nothing, because there was nothing honest to add. Cal rubbed his thumb along the paper cup. I think that's how people lose each other too. That stayed in Wyatt's head long after the conversation ended. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. The worst failures rarely arrived like explosions. Most came quietly, piece by piece. The snowstorm hit during the 6th week. A heavy wind slammed across the valley before midnight, rattling the kennel walls hard enough to wake everyone. Ice gathered along the generator lines. One heater failed just after 1 in the morning. Atlas stopped eating completely. By 2:30, his breathing had become uneven. Wyatt sat beside him on the kennel floor while Elena prepared warm compresses, and Dr. Hannah guided them through medication adjustments over the radio. Vesper refused to leave Atlas's side. The old shepherd lay with his head resting near Thomas Reeves' weathered glove, barely reacting when Wyatt touched his shoulder. For the first time since bringing Atlas home, fear entered the room fully. Not fear of death, and fear of uncertainty. Wyatt remained awake beside Atlas until nearly dawn. The storm screamed against the outer walls while snow buried the yard outside. At some point during the night, Elena finally slept sitting upright against the workbench. Wyatt stayed on the floor. Vesper moved beside him and rested her muzzle on the old leather glove. Wyatt stared at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, he spoke. You remember Thomas? Vesper's ears shifted slightly. Wyatt looked toward the storm-dark window. He used to think being useful was the same thing as being worth something. His voice roughened. Truth is, I think I believe that too. The heater clicked weakly back on. Atlas breathed shallowly beneath the blankets. Wyatt rested one hand gently against the old shepherd's neck. When I left the service, he admitted softly, I kept waiting to become someone else. The confession surprised even him. Vesper lifted her head and rested it against his knee. Wyatt closed his eyes briefly. For years he had believed purpose came from missions, commands, usefulness, structure. Now an aging dog barely able to stand had forced him to confront something simpler and far more frightening. Maybe a life did not need to remain useful to remain worthy of care. By morning, the storm had passed. As sunlight flooded the valley in hard gold, fresh snow sparkling across the repaired fences and cleared paths, Atlas was still alive, weak, exhausted, but alive. Near noon, Sheriff Ransom arrived for inspection. He walked slowly across the property while Elena demonstrated medication logs to a town clerk. Eli repaired hinges near the outer yard. A volunteer veteran carefully hand-fed an arthritic black lab near the south kennel. Mara stood beside the supply shelves reviewing donor receipts and operational expenses. Nothing looked polished, but nothing looked abandoned anymore either. A Ransom stopped near the porch where Atlas rested beneath the winter sun, Vesper lying beside him like a shadow that had chosen to stay. The sheriff removed his glasses. For a long moment he said nothing. His eyes moved across the property again. The repaired fencing, the volunteer schedules, the stocked food shelves, the dogs resting safely inside heated kennels, the people who had begun showing up for each other without being asked. Finally, Ransom looked toward Wyatt. "Show me the long-term lease proposal." No apology, no speech, but it was the first sentence that sounded like the town had stopped preparing for Northridge to die. Winter entered its brighter season. Snow still covered Sawtooth Valley from fence line to mountain ridge, but the storms had eased. Sunlight lingered longer across the valley now, turning the frozen fields into sheets of gold and silver by late morning. Smoke rose from chimneys in slow gray ribbons. The air still carried cold enough to sting the lungs, yet something in the valley no longer felt shut down. Northridge survived the 60 days, but Wyatt refused to reopen it under the same name. One morning, Eli Boone helped him mount a long cedar board above the front gate. The wood had been sanded smooth by hand, though one edge still carried a rough imperfection where Eli's saw blade had slipped. Wyatt preferred it that way. Perfect things rarely lasted. Burned carefully into the cedar were the words, "The Last Post Sanctuary." Below it, in smaller letters, "No loyal soul leaves alone." Nobody applauded when the sign went up. Mara simply stood beneath it with both hands inside her coat pockets, eyes shining quietly in the winter light. Elena hung a small brass bell beneath the porch awning. Dr. Hannah checked medication inventory near the office window while pretending not to look emotional about any of it. The sanctuary opened without ceremony. No speeches. No ribbon cutting. Just hot coffee, boots crunching through snow, old dogs moving slowly across the yard, and people who had finally stopped pretending they did not need somewhere to belong. The bell rang once that afternoon. A retired deputy from Twin Falls arrived with an aging Labrador whose hips failed whenever temperatures dropped below freezing. The man removed his hat before entering the yard and stood awkwardly beside the gate like someone arriving at church after many years away. Elena greeted him gently. Mara wrote the dog's name into the old ledger book from Northridge. The bell rang again. Not to celebrate, to acknowledge arrival. You made it here. That became enough. This Atlas lasted another 12 days. There were good mornings among them. One afternoon he managed to stand beneath the old pine tree behind the kennel while sunlight warmed the snow around him. Vesper remained pressed against his side, steadying him without being told. Atlas even ate nearly an entire bowl that evening, while Wyatt sat nearby sharpening tools in silence. For a dangerous moment, hope returned too strongly. Dr. Hannah noticed immediately. "He's comfortable today," she told Wyatt while checking Atlas's breathing. "Don't confuse comfort with recovery." Wyatt nodded once, but that night he stayed beside Atlas longer than usual anyway. The old shepherd slept with Thomas Reeves' weathered glove resting near his front paws. The leather had cracked further over the winter, but Atlas still searched for it whenever the blankets shifted. Near midnight, Elena stepped quietly into the kennel carrying fresh water. "You should sleep," she whispered. Wyatt shook his head. Elena looked toward Atlas. "You know," she said softly, "most animals don't fear death the way people do." Wyatt stared ahead. What do they fear? She watched Vesper curl closer against Atlas's ribs. Being alone when it comes? The words settled heavily between them, not dramatic, certain. 3 days later, Atlas stopped trying to stand. And the pain medication still worked enough to keep him calm, but his body had begun withdrawing from the effort of staying. Dr. Hannah examined him carefully beneath the winter sun, while Mara sat nearby holding the old ledger against her chest. When Hannah finally looked up, nobody asked the question aloud. They already understood. That afternoon, Elena spread thick blankets beneath the large pine tree where the sunlight stayed longest. Snow glowed softly around the clearing, bright enough to hurt the eyes if stared at too long. Atlas rested there between Wyatt and Vesper. No steel table, no fluorescent lights, no cold room smelling of disinfectant and endings, just sunlight. The old leather glove remained beside him. Eli Boone stood quietly near the repaired fence line with his hat removed. Cal Whitcomb arrived carrying nothing this time. He lowered himself slowly onto one knee beside Atlas, the movement stiff with age and regret. For a while he could not speak. Then, finally, "Thank you for that day." His voice cracked roughly. "I'm sorry it took me this long to come back." Atlas's breathing remained slow and shallow, but peaceful. Cal placed one trembling hand gently atop the blanket before stepping away again. No one rushed the moment. And the sanctuary had already learned something important. Love did not become more real when performed loudly. Wyatt sat beside Atlas until the winter sunlight shifted lower through the trees. Vesper pressed herself firmly against Atlas's side, sharing warmth the way dogs always had long before humans invented words for mercy. Wyatt reached down and unclipped the old identification tag from Atlas's collar. The metal was worn almost smooth from years of use. He held it tightly in his palm. For a long time he said nothing. Then he leaned closer. "Good boy." Only 2 words, small enough to disappear into the wind, but something in Atlas relaxed after hearing them. Yet the old shepherd released one final breath beneath the sunlight, surrounded not by procedure, but by presence. Vesper lowered her muzzle gently across Atlas's paw. Nobody cried loudly. Even grief understood this moment did not belong to noise. Mara bowed her head over the ledger book. Eli stared out toward the mountains. Elena covered her mouth with trembling fingers while Dr. Hannah quietly removed her gloves and stepped back to give the silence room to exist. Wyatt remained seated beside Atlas for a long while after, not because he believed he could stop death. He finally understood that had never been the mission. You could not save every loyal thing from dying. But maybe you could save them from something worse, being discarded, being reduced to expired usefulness, leaving the world without hearing love one final time. A year later, winter returned to Sawtooth Valley brighter than before. The last post sanctuary had become the warmest place in the valley during cold months. Old dogs slept beneath blankets on sunny porches. Veterans repaired fencing together in the mornings. Elena managed medication schedules while training new volunteers. Mara continued writing every incoming dog's name carefully into the ledger. Dr. Hannah still arrived weekly with medical supplies and hard truths nobody resented anymore. Eli taught younger volunteers how to replace hinges properly. Cal delivered dog food on the first Monday of every month without fail, and each new arrival rang the brass bell once beneath the awning. One clear morning, Wyatt stood near the gate beside Vesper. She had aged noticeably now. Silver spread across her muzzle, and her steps had slowed, but her eyes remained alert beneath the winter sun. An old pickup truck stopped outside the sanctuary fence. A man in his late 50s stepped out slowly, shoulders tight beneath a worn army jacket. Beside him stood a German Shepherd missing part of one ear. The man hesitated before the gate for several seconds, and then he said quietly, "I heard this place takes dogs nobody needs anymore." Wyatt looked at him, then at the shepherd beside him. Finally, he opened the gate. "No," Wyatt answered. "This place takes dogs that still deserve to be needed." The man's eyes reddened instantly. Behind them, the brass bell rang once in the cold morning air. Vesper walked forward slowly and sat before the new shepherd. The 2 dogs studied each other beneath the winter sunlight without barking, without fear, without needing introduction. Behind them, sanctuary life continued, snow being shoveled, coffee steaming in cold hands, old dogs sleeping peacefully beneath blankets, people learning how to stay. As Sheriff Ransom appeared near the supply shed carrying a heavy bag of dog food. He said nothing as he set it down and walked inside to help repair shelving beside Eli. Wyatt looked once more toward the cedar sign above the gate. The last post sanctuary. No loyal soul leaves alone. For the first time in years, standing beneath the bright Idaho winter sky, he no longer felt like a man guarding loss. He was guarding a promise, and under the sunlight, that promise kept living. This story was never really about saving a dog from death. It was about saving a loyal soul from being forgotten. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not fixing what cannot be fixed, but staying beside someone until the very end. In a world that moves on quickly, gratitude is a choice we must keep making again and again. Maybe there's someone in your life, a person, an old friend, even a faithful animal, who simply needs to know they still matter. And maybe that quiet reminder is one of God's smallest miracles. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Yeah, and if you'd like more stories about loyalty, hope, and second chances, you're welcome to subscribe and stay with us. Wherever you are tonight, may you find peace. And may no loyal soul in your life ever feel abandoned.